What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another tournament breakdown presented by Midway USA. This one's coming to you from the Harris chain, and by far our toughest event in a really long time. And I can't explain why. I felt like I was either doing all the right things in the wrong areas or doing all the wrong things in the right areas, if that makes sense. And I spent a lot of my practice looking offshore because I felt like being there later in the year, April, most of the fish were going to be done spawning. Where I really screwed up is I spent most of my time idling around Big Lake Harris and Little Harris, and the water quality there is just pretty terrible, pretty atrocious. It's dirty. There's hardly any grass, offshore grass to filter it. Uh, like very minimal eelgrass, very minimal hydrilla. The lake's honestly in pretty rough shape. When you catch the fish, they're skinny. Uh, but historically, that's where a lot of the offshore stuff can happen, right? Is in Harris. It's got a lot of shell bars. It's not silted in as much like a lot of the other lakes, and that that kind of came back to bite me, right? Is using that history in my game plan. And the way I thought I was going to fish the tournament ended up not being the way I fished it. Day one, I started trying to fish some offshore stuff and chase some fish that were maybe on a shad spawn and just outside of a shad spawn. And I wasn't getting any bites. And in practice, I found one fish on a bed that was about a 3.5 pounder. And I thought, well, I'll go try to catch that one because that'll be like a kicker fish this week. And when I rolled in there, I found Justin Hamner in there. He had just caught a 5 pounder, seen some 3 pounders swimming around. I saw a new fish on a bed. It was like more fish pulled into that canal for whatever reason. And I ended up catching most of those fish. I had one big one that I kept trying to catch, and she just never would lock on. But I was pitching the X Zone Deception Worm, excuse me, and Green Pumpkin Blue, trusty old Deception Worm, bailing me out again. And that bait just gets bit. Doesn't matter where you're at, Lay Lake, Florida, up north, out west, East Coast, it just gets bit. And then pairing that up with little 1/4 ounce X Zone Tungsten, teardrop, drop shot weight, spooled up on a Daiwa Exist with the new Seaguar PEX 8 braid. And I like throwing that in the 21-pound test size. Still super, super thin for a 21-pound test, but it casts well, handles the big fish well. And then I actually had a 12-pound Seaguar Tatsu leader on this week. Just something a little bit heavier because I was pitching this drop shot around cover and shell, and I wanted a little bit more abrasion resistance on that, and then on the Alpha Angler DSR. So a setup you guys have seen me use many, many a times, and I ended up catching, I think, all my fish on day one on this bait, just pitching it around that canal, either blind pitching fish or sight fishing fish that were cruising or getting ready to bed. And I just needed that one big bite, and I could have had a really good first day. But we ended up with 9 pounds on day one. And then day two, I decided like I was just going to do something different. Right? I needed to do something different. I had some fish in Eustis I thought that I could go catch, and I don't know if the heavy south winds blew it out or what happened. I couldn't get a bite. Could not get a bite. And so about partway through the day, I just bailed and said, I'm going to the lower lakes. And I had spent really the last 30 minutes to an hour of my practice in there, and it just looked right. Everything felt right. And that didn't click in my head to just go do that and figure it out in the tournament. I just kind of pushed it aside and didn't follow those gut feelings that I had in practice. And then when I run down there to go fish the stuff I want to fish, I come around the corner and John Garrett's sitting there. And I was like, gosh, dang it. Like I just barely missed it. And instead of potentially having a good tournament, who's to say I might not have even been able to catch those fish? But I wrote it off before I had even tried it, and ended up having a tough event. But I ended up catching most of my fish down there, just running stuff that I had idled around and marked, right? Could have been a laydown tree, a brush pile, a hard spot drop off, and still caught my fish on the drop shot, some of the fish I weighed day 2, and then catching them on the Vision 110 plus 2. A lot of those fish were 10 to 12 foot, and I was throwing that in the HT Edo Tennessee shad, and really just covering water with that and targeting those places. It seemed like if there was, some sort of hard piece of structure and then some brim beds around that, that's where most of the fish were. Throwing that on 12-pound Seaguar Tatsu, Alpha Angler Slasher, and a Daiwa Steez CT SV. I like that small handle, or that small frame size for throwing jerk baits and things like that. It just gives me a little bit more control over my jerk baits. Again, really tough week for us, finishing up in 93rd, but we learned a lot from it, right? Trusting our gut, trusting our instincts, and sometimes you just have to gamble in the tournament to have a better event. And I tried to fish too much history and not paying attention to the conditions. So we learned from that. We'll come back better on the next one. If you guys do want to check out these baits, you guys go check them out on midwayusa.com. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.